Whether it's a tropical paradise or simply a means to get away, islands serve as the perfect getaway opportunity for you to live in seclusion if you so wish. But what happens when paranormal entities stalk the island in which you are visiting? I don't know about you, and I don't know about the whole entire world, but an island doesn't seem that appealing after knowing what lurks within it. So here we go, stories that you can probably enjoy that are on an island, but you'll probably rethink whether you want to actually stay there and live there possibly. House on French Island. The town that I grew up in is made of many small islands smushed together and separated by a river. One part of this is nicknamed French Island due to the fact that when the town was settled, the French families mostly settled there in a cluster. I lived in an apartment on French Island 3 years ago with a good friend of mine. The apartment was in a 2-story house, each story being one apartment, and we had the top story. To get into either apartment, you needed to walk into the garage, and then directly to your left was the door to the downstairs apartment, and shortly past there was a corner and then wooden stairs. Rough, not finished, no handrail, etc., that led up to a landing in our apartment door. There were 4 significant experiences during the year we lived at the apartment. 3 of them happened to me, and 1 happened to my roommate, Liz, and she told me about it the next day. I'm going to post them in separate stories since they're pretty long. First, a small description of our apartment. When you walk in the main door, you are in a room about 24 feet square. There are 2 doorways on the wall directly opposite of the main door, one on each half of the room. The one on the left is to the living room. The one on the right went to my roommate's room. The room is separated into 2 areas by a partial wall in the middle, not parallel to the walls with the doors on them. It goes to the other way. That goes from the floor 3/4 of the way to the ceiling. This partial wall runs from one side of the room to the other with the exception of a 3-foot walking space on both ends. The left side is the dining area, the right side is the kitchen. If you walk from the main room into the living room, my bedroom door was on the other end. The bathroom was built into the corner of the kitchen beside my roommate's bedroom. That was the whole apartment. First thing that happened, my roommate used to have a rocker recliner in the living room that had a broken spring on the bottom of it. You had to really put some effort into rocking it and made it a very distinct squeaking noise when you did. I was asleep in my room on a day off. It was about 10 in the morning, so I was about half asleep. I was lying on my bed when the squeaking noise that the recliner made was rocking, and it woke me up. It sounded like it was rocked back and forth 2 or maybe 3 times. I sat up and yelled, "Liz," to see if it was my roommate, and the noise stopped. I was really confused because my roommate was supposed to be at work in a town an hour away. I lay back down thinking I had imagined it and fell back asleep. Then I heard it again. Same thing happened. It sounded like someone was rocking back and forth, and when I called out my roommate's name, it stopped. This time I sat on my bed and didn't go back to sleep, and about 5 minutes later, I heard it again. I yelled out for my roommate yet again, telling her it wasn't funny if she was playing a trick on me. I told her she was scaring me and she needed to stop. The rocking stopped as soon as I had said something to her. After a few more minutes, I opened my door and went out into the living room. My roommate was not home. She had been working all day, and there was no one else in the house. Just to reiterate, this chair could not have rocked on its own because of the broken spring. You literally had to put both feet flat on the floor and push to rock it back. Also, I should add that I wasn't really very scared. I was a little uneasy when I was in my room, but after I went into the living room, I felt fine. I actually ended up sitting in that very chair and watching TV after. More to come. One night around 11 p.m., Liz was in the bathroom brushing her teeth with the door open. The bathroom was very small, only about 5 feet by 4 feet, with a sink, stand-up shower, and toilet. So needless to say, she was half out the door and half in the bathroom when she was standing there. She had her left side facing out of the bathroom when she suddenly saw a figure out of the corner of her eye come from the living room to the dining area. It was dark in the house, but her bedroom light was on. The figure startled her a little. She first thought it was me. She finished brushing her teeth and then went to the dining area to ask me what I was doing, but I wasn't there. Then she came into my bedroom to find me asleep. I told her I hadn't left my room at all. She described it as a grayish-white figure in color and about the same height and build as me, 5'7", 135 pounds. No sound or anything like that, just seeing it out of the corner of her eye. Another incident I had, it was about 7:30 p.m. I was in the kitchen cutting up vegetables for a stir fry. Now, where I was standing, I had the kitchen sink about 6 feet to my left, a regular-sized 4 feet tall, 2 feet wide window about half feet to my right, and the refrigerator was about 2 feet behind me and 6 inches to my left, directly across the sink. I was standing at the counter there and talking to my roommate who was in the living room. I looked up at the cupboard directly in front of my face and was about to reach up and grab a dish out of it when I saw in the window to my right the reflection of something on the other side of me. A white form about the same height as me, maybe a little taller, looked as if it was standing exactly where my sink was. I couldn't see it through the sink, only the top half. It moved from the sink past my right side. As soon as it stepped out of the sink, I could see the whole form and into the refrigerator. I couldn't make out any features. I sensed that it was a female, but I'm not 100% sure. I felt scared, but only because it startled me, not because I thought it was going to harm me. I made my roommate come out and stand in the kitchen with me until I was finished, and we didn't see it again. Also, we didn't have the shade down on the window, but it couldn't have been a light from outside because there was no cars going by at that time. It was a dead-end street and fairly quiet, and it was definitely a reflection of something behind me. This is the last one, and by far the most frightening. Me, my roommate Liz, our friend Jenny had just gotten home from supper. It was about 6 or 7 in the evening. We went into the garage and turned the corner to get up the stairs. Liz was already up on the landing opening our door. Me and Jenny were on the first set of stairs, almost to the first landing. There was a light outside the bottom floor apartment door, so around the corner from where we were, and at the very top by our apartment door, but none on the stairway, so the stairway was very dark but not pitch black. Me and Jenny were on the stairs. She was just stepping onto the small landing on the first corner, and I was directly behind her. As we were walking, I looked to my right, and from under the stairs, the small landing to be exact, this face came out and up at me very quickly. It was just white and blurry with black spot for eyes and the mouth, which was open. It was terrifying. It felt very angry and like it was trying to scare us. Jenny did not see it. I screamed and pushed her up the stairs and then wouldn't go back out by myself. We went and got a flashlight. We went back down and looked under the stairs, but we didn't see anything. The Haunted Theater of Lowe Island. When I was a kid, I worked at Lowe Island as a summer job. I was there the night of the tornado. It was that night that we saw the ghost of Smiley the Magician. I know the name sounds silly, but it is the actual name of the god. Lowe Island was an amusement park that was at one time larger than Cedar Point. In my days, they were very comparable, although I think Cedar Point was a little larger. It was on a small island in the Detroit River at the mouth of Lake Erie. It was a Canadian island and had passenger boats that sailed from Detroit, Gibraltar, and Amherst, Ontario. I'd worked several places on the island throughout the summer. Many of my shifts were half days, so the rest of the day I would spend hanging out at the amusement park. One of the places I would go was the old theater. The magicians at the time were always changing, and there was a lot of pretty showgirls. It seemed people never worked the theater very long. One of the old magicians, who seemed to have some fame behind him, had worked at Lowe for many years in his younger days. He would tell all the stagehands secrets about the building, stuff like special modifications to the stage that were built for certain tricks that were no longer allowed to be performed, and famous people who had secretly worked or visited the stage. This old guy told many stories, and he was very good at telling them. The staff ate up the stories, especially the one about Smiley. Smiley Smilovich, magician extraordinaire, performed in the Lowe Theater magic show in the late 1930s to early 40s. His claim to fame was that he had attended Harry Houdini's private classes and operated his backstage performances in the 1920s. He was close enough that he visited Houdini several times in the Detroit hospital just before he died, where Houdini had told him secrets of his magic tricks and discussed with him ideas he had for future tricks. This gave Smiley an edge over all other entertainers, and he had a long and semi-famous career. He eventually settled in to perform at Lowe since back in the day it was a high-paying gig. Smiley, at the end of his career, was an older Jewish man who was very large and imposing. He had a longer square beard and often wore a polo hat. He was not in good health, but being a vaudeville actor was able to dazzle the crowds. It is said that he drew the largest crowds ever to that little old theater. He died on stage during a trick. Of course, I do not believe much about the story, as there were many stories of people who died from being thrown off rides to people who died performing a high-diving act or risky performances. Some time had gone by and I forgot all about it, until one day I was in the main office in the cafeteria. On the tables were several old black and white photos of the island throughout the years. They were some sort of collection or something. Someone had been working hard on sorting tons of old pictures. I don't know why, nor did I ever meet the person, as I only had 20 minutes to eat and get back to my job. So I thumbed through some of the pictures. There were pictures of the old water ski show with names signed on the pictures. There was the old captain who had given a personal message on his picture. All the pictures showed the island throughout the years. Then I found a picture of the old theater. It was very new in the picture and had a very large man dressed in black formal wear with a large beard and a bolo hat. He was standing in front of the main doors as a flood of people were entering. He was standing with his arms up and outstretched. He seemed proud and happy. At the bottom of the picture, in faded pencil, was the written name Smiley. It was him. The story could be true. The image of the picture is still burnt into my mind today. It was a very amazing discovery and stayed in my thoughts for a long time. But eventually it had passed and I did not think about it any longer until the night of the tornado. It had been a long time since I thought about the old theater story, as the old magician that told the stories was no longer around. It was in late summer, I think. I was now working as security. We were warned that there were bad storms moving in, and in no time, the sky turned that gray-yellow, and the winds that were strung off and on winds died out completely. It was then that we were told that there was a tornado warning in effect and that the longer rides were being shut down until it cleared. In no time, the sky turned black, the air turned cool, and the cracks of lightning in the distance could be seen. At this time, most of the people had packed into the last 3 or so boats off the island. There were 5 boats in total, 2 large southern paddle stream boats that docked in Detroit. The St. Clair can be seen in Transformers 4, and the Columbia. They left and would not return. There was a cruiser yacht that docked in Gibraltar. It is too sailed and would not return. This left the last boat that docked in Amherstburg. It was the Papoose. It was a bi-level tugboat-shaped passenger boat, sat probably 50 on the main floor and 30 on the top roofless deck. It was still doing a few more trips every 30 minutes. The weather was getting really bad, and word got around that they were going to evacuate the island. All the other boats were no longer returning, and the only little Papoose was going to bring up the rest of the people to shelter in Amherstburg. Soon the announcement went out, and the park got really quiet. The wind was terrible, and we, security, passed from building to building to avoid the harsh winds. We were told to do a quick search of the island and then get back to the loading docks to evacuate on the last boat. The loading docks was a small dock that is the only landing used today. It was on the far end of the island and sheltered more from the winds. We were told to be no longer than 30 minutes because the captain said he would not make it back to the Amherstburg docks. As we scattered out into our designated areas, I remember all the stuffed animals blowing down the main path in one large tumbling ball. They were blown out into the river. Also, all the garbage cans were dumping and sending garbage, dust and litter zipping past in the air. We moved through the area and did a quick look. My area was very near the old theater. I stopped and met up with another group. At this time, it was getting really bad. The old-fashioned cars were blowing and rolling down the streets. About 5 of us met up at the food court, and we all agreed to go onto the loading docks. We had about 10 minutes left, and we were on the far side of the island. We would have to move quickly. Just as we were getting ready to leave, someone asked if the old theater was checked. It wasn't, so me and one of the others agreed to check it out quickly, as we were bigger guys and the winds was not throwing us around as much as the others. So we moved quickly towards the old theater, and the others took off for the loading docks. The wind was screaming, and I had to lean into the wind when crossing the open paths, as so I would not be the one knocked off my feet. Just as we were about to make it to the theater, the power on the island failed. Emergency lights kicked in. They were red lights and same floodlights that were sparsely scattered throughout the island and in buildings. With the lights out, I could now see the sky. It was black, and the wind moved through it so strong that you could actually see the wind. It was foggy streams of air blasting overhead. Then we saw the teacup Ferris wheel pods flying over above our heads. I counted 3 of them as we made it into the theater. The theater was dark, and for the first time, it was really spooky. We quickly searched the main room and backstage. We spoke to each other as we moved around, calling out for anyone. We discussed the tornado, and it was the best to stay in the theater instead of facing the wind for the total length of the island. We knew we had about 6 to 8 minutes left. As we got ready to dash out, satisfied that the theater was empty, we both stopped, as the theater suddenly felt occupied. We both looked back at the stage and could see in the dark shadows between the partially open curtains a large, bearded man in a bolo hat looking right at us. He seemed confused and concerned. He looked at both of us, me first and then the other guy. I shot a glance at the other security guy. He was as white as I was. The magician moved to come out of the shadows and we bolted out of the theater. The winds were howling on and off and sounded like a tea kettle. We darted in full run back to the food court, through the back passages behind the games and rides to the main path. We stopped only for a second as we paced ourselves to cut across the open area of the main path. We watched a long fume cart roll past us and could see the vending tents were stripped of their canvases. Other rides were crashing into each other and tumbling around. We bolted and semi-skidded across the main path. Then we were tucked in behind the buildings and made a break for the loading docks. The docks were separated by a large opening of wide open ground, but the ground was forested and seemed somewhat sheltered from the wind. The wind was not as bad, but we could hear the wind behind us screaming like a steam whistle. We made a mad dash for the docks and found the boat. The water from the river was spraying everywhere. I almost hesitated as the thought of climbing on the boat that was heaving around so violently in constant water spray slamming into my face seemed worse than staying on the land. We were quickly helped onto the boat and huddled in the bottom enclosed area. We were counted and given life jackets and told to sit with our hands and heads between our knees. At this point, the other security guard and I were separated. We waited for one last crazy guy to get on, who made it within 1 minute late. The boat set off and fought the massive ocean like swells in the river. The boat rose and rocked and slammed into the water over and over and over. Water sprayed in through the badly sealed windows and back door. The hull of the boat thundered off the waves and cracking, snapping and banging noises frightened me into pseudo-reality where I was very aware I was about to drown at any moment as the boat would suddenly go under the waves. I can remember faintly hearing some of the girls quietly crying and trembling mumbles from others like I was hearing them through earmuffs or from a dreamlike state. The boat ride took forever. The captain, bravest boat captain I have ever known, fought the winds and waves for almost 2 hours. The boat ride typically took 15 minutes. He fought the currents and edged his way with each wave closer to the shore. Finally, we docked. We were told to get off quickly as the boat was crashing into the docks. It could not stay long. It had to make it to the boat wells that were sheltered before it was badly damaged. We all got off as quickly as we could. The docks were tossing with the waves and the boat was tossed around. The dock hands quickly grabbed you by the arms and flung you over the gangplank and onto the solid docks. We rushed down the docks as pieces of the steel roof tore off. We rushed until we reached the underground passage under the road that would lead up steps on the far side to the parking lot. It wasn't until I was well under the cement underpass that I stopped to turn to see the island. It was almost impossible to see, but in the moments when the lightning cracked, I could see the black swirling mass of clouds consuming the island. I made it to the parking lot and then drove home. The winds were not as bad on the land. The storm did not seem to have that power behind it. On the way home, I thought for sure the island was destroyed. The next day, after the storm passed, I drove past the island. There was a ton of debris in the water. The island was a wreck, but it was still mostly intact. It actually was not even close to as bad as I thought it would be. Bablo stayed closed for the rest of the season. It opened late in the spring of the following year, but it did not do well. It closed for the last time at the end of that year. That night was the last time I was on the island. It marked the end of an era for me. My youth had been spent measuring the time in the year from when the seasonal passes would go on sale. I would get one and ride my bike to the parking lot and spend a day at the amusement park. I knew every corner, every ride. I met so many great kids from near and afar, had so many fun times that were truly carefree and wondrous. I always thought that I would buy my kids seasonal tickets, as it was the best feeling in the world to a kid to spend days and nights at the park. I was very sad to see it close. I never understood the politics or business behind it. Our little town dwindled significantly. Our summer tourism brought tons of jobs and people into the town. It gave families places to visit and kids jobs. The town has never truly ever recovered. I never saw or spoke to the other security guard about what we saw. I actually can't even remember his name. The island is now stripped on most of anything that would resemble an amusement park. Only a few buildings and the Sky Tower structure still stand. The far end of the island is now luxury homes. I recently visited the island to see that the old theater still stands. It is completely grown over with weeds and trees. It is boarded up but still stands. I was there with my kids, so I did not venture in to look. We spent the day walking the grounds, and I was telling the layout of the park and reminiscing of all the fun times I had as a kid. That was a good day. I did tell a few guys at work, and one even visited the island. He said he was able to get into the theater, though one of the boarded up doors was boarded up. He said it was freaky inside, and he felt as if he was being watched the whole entire time. I told him this story that I have written here. He seemed concerned for a few moments during the story, and then we laughed off the legend of Smiley Smilovich as we parted. But I knew the ghost was real, and I think my coworker did too. I have recently seen the theater on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it if you look. Most people don't know what it is. If you see it, you will know it is a large 2-story building with a balcony. It is overgrown with trees and branches. As for the other buildings, there is a church structure. It's not a church. It was made to look like a church, but was in fact the powerhouse. It was part of the antique car ride that at one time had a larger track that led it through an English countryside. By the time I was attending the island, the car track was reduced to a figure 8. The church was also part of the costume characters that once performed at the island. There is also the old souvenir shop and food court left pavilion, and the old dance hall that was once the second largest in the world, that had the largest automated symphony ever built, a giant music box. I honestly don't know how much of Smiley's story is true, nor do I know what came first, the story or the ghost. But I do now know that there was a picture out there of Smiley and there is a ghost. If you visit, I am sure you could still find him. An eerie visit to Alcatraz Island. While I have never seen anything unusual that I would connect to being supernatural, I have sensed something that I think was supernatural 2 times in my life. A sensation where the hair on my neck and arms stood up and an intense sense of dread came over me. The first time I felt this sensation, I was touring the Alcatraz prison in San Francisco. The other occasion was at the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose. Both places have unusual histories, and some believe a connection to the supernatural. Alcatraz is a portal, as some say, and the Winchester House was supposed to be inhabited by spirits. In 1988, I had gone to San Francisco with a foreign exchange student friend to show him all the sights in California. It was April, spring break time, and we were climbing all over the island, eagerly taking pictures of the crumbling old prison and looking for places that would be interesting to photograph. We joked around, taking pictures of each other behind bars and also long shots in the hallways full of cell bars. We split up after about 30 minutes and looked in different parts on our own in our quest for places worthy of photographing. I headed towards a hallway that I presumed led out into the opposite side of the island from where the ferry landing was. Before I went out, I stopped by a room that was nothing notable and didn't have any furniture or fixtures that would indicate what it was when Alcatraz was a functioning prison. There was an information plaque on the wall with an old photo of the room as it looked several decades earlier that indicated it was the former barber room or shower room. I can't exactly remember now what it was called. The walls were painted with a pastel green paint and there was nothing scary about the room. I was alone in the room and suddenly I heard this intense feeling as I stood in there. As I mentioned before, the hair on my neck and arms stood up, and the feeling that something in the room had suddenly changed, and I sensed something was wrong there. There was nothing threatening or sad about this room that could have influenced the way I felt, but the feeling was nothing unmistakably eerie and depressing. I think back now about how that moment has stayed with me, and I always wonder what made the feeling come over me and its connection to the room's history. I now wish that I had taken a picture of that empty room just because it is the part of the island I remember so vividly. Wolf Island Romance. In the summer of 1983, when I was 23 years old, myself and 4 of my friends sailed to Wolf Island to spend the weekend. We landed on the island in the late afternoon and quickly set up our tents and began meal preparations. After dinner, we set a fire and sat around telling stories until late in the night. Hazel, one of the members of our group, was from Yorkshire and had been in Canada for only a couple of weeks. She was a pixie-like girl who marveled at the Canadian landscape and was taken by our wildlife, in particular, fireflies. She had never seen them before, and when she saw them, she thought they were fairies. After having a few after-dinner cocktails and listening to Hazel recite the Jabberwock, we decided to turn it in. My boyfriend and I decided that because it was such a clear night with no mosquitoes, we would forego our tent and sleep under the stars. Everyone went to their respective beds. Everyone woke with the sun, and as Hazel came out from her tent, she asked my boyfriend and I if we had managed okay during the thunderstorm. My boyfriend and I had spent the whole night outside. There had been no thunderstorm. Hazel was adamant. She said that she had awakened in the middle of the night to the sound of the thunder and on the rain on the tent, and that she would hear people outside the tent. She said that she looked out the tent and through the rain she could see a couple holding hands and walking the path by our campsite. We assured her that we had been outside the whole night and that there had been no storm. The group of us passed off Hazel's experience as a vivid dream and left it at that. Several years later, one of the members of our camping trip contacted me. He was flabbergasted as he had read in an article in the local paper about area ghosts, and there was an account of the tragic couple whose boat capsized during a thunderstorm while they were going to the island from Fort Henry, and both had drowned. The Lady of Knapp's Island. This story will be a quickie. There is not much to this event, and worse yet, there is not much known history. As with my other stories, I will begin with a quick introduction. I grew up in a small town south of Windsor, Ontario. The lands around me were mostly farm fields and marsh. Town was a simple few-minute drive after you turned left at the end of my street. If you turn right, you head out further into the sticks and are subjected to the back roads. These roads passed through the marshes and consisted of several land bridges, with a few of them low square-formed cement style. Regardless, there were a lot of deep ditches, washouts, floodlands, swamps, and brushes before you started back into solid farmlands. As a young adult, I was into a lot of the ghost activities of the area and for a time did a lot of research. Many of the events in my life were self-inflicted in one way or another. This one was not. It occurred by sheer happenstance. Before I get into the details, you will need to know a little bit of the troubles young adults have of buying alcohol in Canada, as it is not steadily available. Alcohol in Canada is sold from two different stores only. You have the beer store that sells anything to do with beer. Then you have the LCBO that sells all the hard stuff, wine and imported exotic coolers and beers. The beer store always seemed closed when a party was on. I think it closes at 6 p.m. Insane time, considering we are Canadian. Beer is practically our national mascot. The LCBO stays open until 9 p.m., and one location in Windsor stayed open until 12 p.m. So imported crappy, who made this crap beer, was always our closers on a late party night. The first occurrence was after a crazy night of partying. We had a barn party and we had been all over the county looking for beer and or alcohol, as it was not steadily available at that time of night, so we made a trip into the city and to a known hillbilly farm that brewed White Lightning. So there we're barreling down the dark, foggy road in the twilight hours. We were 18 and wild on an autumn night. It was probably about 3 a.m., and I was with a buddy of mine and our girlfriends in my car. We were returning to the barn to finish the night out with our girlfriends in the hay. We had scored some moonshine and had a few imported beers that were the make of the night that made it go smoothly. This night was a calm night. It was dark and foggy. It had a 1974 black on black Dodge Dart muscle car with a V8 that growled down the highway. I loved this car and drove it everywhere until gas hit 1 a liter. The headlights were incandescent bulbs. If you are old enough, you will remember them. They were a yellowish light and were not very bright. They did give off a very ominous, luminous glow. Of course, the party barn was on the far side of the swamps, and in the fog, one was always cautious of animals running out in front of you. So I was paying attention to the outer spectrum of my headlight range, looking for motion and shadows. What we're talking about at the time, I cannot remember, but I am sure it was something stupid. We were passing a swamp area with water on both sides when I saw a faint light. At first I thought it was a reflection from a no trespassing or hunting sign, as they were posted out in the water, but the light was moving towards the roadside ahead in a slow but steady manner. Then I realized I could make out a person. I immediately thought it was a person standing up on a small boat, but I could not see the boat, and the person was actually moving kind of quick. As my car continued and started to pass over the land bridge, the person came into view. I slowed as to be cautious that I might hit them if they crossed in front of me. But it was not making much sense in my head, as there was water where they were and surely they could not reach the land without stopping. So I continued to drive and told the other passengers to look. As I approached what seemed to be our intersecting paths, a lady became clear. She was dressed in an old long jacket with a dolly-style large collar fridge. She was carrying a lantern, something like a stagecoach lamp. She was perfectly visible, yet always somewhat foggy. She had an implied detail about her that left specific impressions of what she looked like, without actually being able to focus on her. Weird. She glided across the road from one water side to the other in front of my car. She passed very close, probably 15 to 20 feet. She moved rather quickly, and I distinctly remember that she did not have any feet, but her legs moved as she was walking under her coat. She was lifted above the road, what looked to be a foot higher than she should have been. We all saw her as she moved back out over the water on the other side and faded into the fog. We were all stunned for a moment. I pulled the car off to the side of the road about a mile up the road. The car was silent with awe. I could not believe what I saw. I asked everyone else and they said they saw her too. We all agreed that she looked as if she was looking for something. Regardless, she was an amazing experience and we were now completely filled with energy and amazement. When we got back to the party, we met up with some other friends and told them what had happened. One of the older farm kids, that was a friend of a friend, or something, said it was the lady of Knapp's Island. I had never heard of her, and I lived only a few minutes from Knapp's Island. I asked him who she was or why she was haunting the area. He did not know anything other than she shows up on random foggy nights, crosses the road, and disappears. So of course this got my attention, and for the next little while I asked around about this ghost. It seems that many of the older generation folks, older I mean 40s and 50s at the time, all knew of her, but no one knew anything about her. She was called the Lady of Knapp's Island because she has been seen at the water crossing just a quarter mile north of the island. I had never been to the island, nor had I ever really looked for it, so a few days later we took a drive out to see the island. It is not much of an island. You depart from the main road down a gravel road following the edge of the swamp. There were only one or two old houses on the road back then, and you travel to the end of the road. The road is only about a mile long and has a large bend in the road before you arrive at a farm that ends the road. At the bend is a small rotted plank bridge that spans about 50 feet out into the swamp, where it lands on a small island of land covered in swamp trees. The island is only about 50 to 60 feet wide and maybe 200 feet long. It narrows significantly at the north end. The whole area looks to be a flood land that remains wet for most of the year. On the island is a rundown, very rotted and old little cabin. It looks as if it was a hunting cabin at one time, but has long since been abandoned and partly overgrown. We never crossed the bridge to get a closer look at the cabin as the wood was too rotted. One telling of the ghost said that she had also been seen in and around the cabin on foggy nights. I thought about checking it out on the next foggy night, but even I was not that crazy. I never discovered any further information about her, but I did see her again years later. I was coming home very late at night, 1 a.m.-ish, and I saw her. This time I was traveling in the opposite direction as I was many years before. I saw her further out and she crossed the road about 200 feet in front of my car. I was amazed and reflected on my past experience for the rest of the ride home. About 2 years after that, my wife, who worked midnights at the time, came home all in a fluster, and she woke me up in to tell me she had seen a woman crossing the road with a lamp. I asked her where she has seen her. She told me in the swamps. I continued to describe to my wife how she looked and how she moved and disappeared on the other side. She was amazed that I knew. I told her she had seen the Lady of Knapp's Island. My wife was beside herself at the time, as she had never seen a ghost and I had never told her any of my stories. Since then, I have never heard anything about the lady. Maybe someday someone will figure her out.